All right, friends, good evening. Okay, that was really lame. Let's try that again. Good evening. And thank you for coming tonight. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and you've come, and we're going to have a nice evening together. I have 3 guests up here with me who literally need no introduction. Harvey Gant is sitting next to me, was on city council back in the 70s, mayor of our city. Clemson graduate, we'll say more about that. Architect. It's all good. It's all good. It's not next week yet. Then we have Molly Grantham, who I saw tonight on Channel 3 doing a story on the United Methodist Church.
You guys have made the news,
Thought they never let up. We were on you guys on Friday, same story. Molly's an author, by the way. I got and read her book called Small Victories, which is a really cool book about being a mom, a working mom, and so on. That's really fascinating. And she's won all kinds of awards and all. Molly, thank you for being with us. And then Tom Hanchett. Tom is a local historian. Worked at the Museum of the New South for a while, now has an office down at the Public Library. He has a new book coming out. It's actually an old book called Sorting Out the New South City. There's a new edition of it that's coming out. It wasn't quite off the press, but it's coming soon. I've said before, this is a book every Charlottean should read. It tells you about the history of the city and racial dynamics over time. It's absolutely splendid. I would commend that to you. So, we're here to talk about beauty. It's a fascinating topic. We decided to make that a theme for our church for the entire year. And as a piece of that, we wanted to talk about the beauty of Charlotte. Because Charlotte's in for an interesting year. We have the RNC coming. In general, people know, they can tell you what's wrong with Charlotte if you were in traffic coming over here. You weren't in a great mood about Charlotte, I'm sure. But one of the things that has been on my heart is that there's so much beauty in this city, and we don't even notice a lot of it. Molly in her book talks about doing an art project with her daughter, and I guess she had some blue paint and pulled out some black buttons, and it's beauty, right? All kinds of beauty, all kinds of places. So we started a Facebook page that I hope you'll follow. It's called @CLTBeautiful, and it has photos. Some of the photographers who've contributed to that are here. Interesting things like under the bridge of the Brookshire. It's an architectural wonder under there, and you've never seen it, right? And all kinds of things. I've been interviewing lots of people, asking the question, what to you is beautiful about Charlotte? And I actually went downtown one day, and I asked Mayor Lyles, and she said, the tree canopy. And then I saw Tariq Bokhari, and he said, the tree canopy. And then I saw Dimple Ajmera, and she said, the tree canopy. And I said, have y'all had a meeting about the tree canopy? She said they had. Anyway, there are lots of different answers. My favorite, as I mentioned some of you before, a little boy, 4 years old, his mom asked him, what's beautiful about Charlotte? He said, the porcupines. The porcupines. There's wall art in Charlotte that people don't always pay attention to. We have abandoned churches, which I, of all people, should not find to be a beautiful thing. But they are a beautiful thing, right? And some are repurposed. We have a couple folks here. They're opening a restaurant in Plaza Midwood in an abandoned church, a repurposed church. There's just beauty all over the place. I thought it would be fun to start with my favorite video of all the people that I've asked what's beautiful about Charlotte. And let's watch this together.
Hey, James Howell, one of the pastors at Myers Park United Methodist Church. I'm here with Liz Clayson Kelly, who is a longtime friend and a wonderful Charlottean. She's the executive director of the newly merged Urban Ministry Center and Men's Shelter. Liz, good to be here in your office in this former train depot. It's a cool place. So tell me, what to you is beautiful about Charlotte?
So I love the question, so thank you for posing it. My mind, when you ask, goes a couple different places. So we are sitting in this building. This is the Seaboard Train Depot, the 3rd train station built in Charlotte. And this was the first place my mind went. Because
we were here.
Well, I love that my office is in this building now, so because it connects us to history. So Charlotte has bulldozed so much of its history, so when there are spaces that connect us with the past, I find that really beautiful. And I love the way we've repurposed it and kind of I love sitting here and knowing that children took their first train ride, here in the early 1900s. People went to war, all sorts of things happened out of this building, and today it's a place where people rebuild their lives. So think about that. I think about Romare Bearden Park, which is one of my favorite spaces, and
Great place.
specifically the waterfall, right? There's this water feature where if you could spend 2 hours there and you'd watch child after child just lose themselves in joy and abandon of playing in the water. But my favorite is when a parent who doesn't think they're going to get in the water all of a sudden, finds themselves getting caught up in abandon and just playing. And it's a place where people of all walks of life play in this community.
It's a great place.
I think about, this is weird, but Costco.
I've never been to a Costco, so tell me about it.
So again, I think I'm moved by the beauty of diversity, because Costco's a place where you can hear so many different languages and see so many different kinds of people. And we're all just making it, right? Like, we're all just living life and getting the groceries and, being resourceful, but it's this just tapestry of who lives here.
That's great.
But I think what I really love about this community and find beautiful is that we don't exactly know who we are yet. We're still in the process of becoming. And I think that's more true here than a lot of other large urban communities, that I feel like so much is still possible. I mean, I feel like, I'm a middle-aged person, and I feel like, by golly, if I wake up every day and join with others, like, we can make differences in this community. And I think
Absolutely.
Charlotte is just accessible in that way. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind.
And it's all about people. I mean, even an old building, it's really about people, the stories. You'd love to be able to travel back in time and picture the people like you envision coming through here. It's amazing.
So that's what, the job that I have every day, I get this front row seat to humanity. And it's humanity in like a very stripped down nature. I mean, people have lost everything, and I can tell you that beauty still remains, kindness still remains. And so that is, we were created in a beautiful image, and we get to see it in this city.
Well, that's a beautiful thought, Liz, some beautiful words. So thank you so much for that and for the work you're doing here in Charlotte.
Thank you so much.
Hey, James Howell, one of the pastors of Myers Park United.
So we don't want to see it again. Once is enough. Liz is amazing. And I wanted to show you that to give you a feel of some of what we're doing, but also to set the tone, that we're not just talking about pretty things in Charlotte. I love it. I had lunch with Mayor Gant on this topic, and he said, if you want me to talk about pretty buildings, and he's designed some of them, like the UNCC Center City. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know what it was until he told me. What is it?
It is the Center City building.
And it's a stack of books.
And that's right. We designed it to twist like a stack of books.
Yeah. And he didn't want to talk about beautiful buildings or even a lot of what he did as mayor and others have done to preserve green space and so on in our city. And I appreciated that. We don't just want to talk about pretty. We want to talk about hidden beauty, surprising beauty. I'm going to start with Tom. In light of Liz's Costco comment and people speaking other languages, I married a Charlotte native, and that's just shocking, right? Because nobody's from Charlotte. People are from all over. If you're from Charlotte, raise your hand. There are a few, there's some, yeah, okay. And there's been this invasion. So Tom, I heard you one time say that we don't have to go to the world, but the world has come to us. If you go out Central Avenue, talk some about the beauty of what you see in diversity, the food scene, things like that.
Well, when I came to Charlotte back in 1981, I came to work for the Landmarks Commission, and I needed affordable housing. Not public housing. I didn't qualify for that, but I was working for a nonprofit. I had a bicycle. I didn't have a car. And pretty quickly, I discovered that the Central Avenue area was full of housing that a lot of people with money and choice had moved elsewhere, and somebody like me could move there. And so I've been around Central Avenue off and on since the 1980s. when I was there first. And in fact, when I came back to work for Levine Museum of the New South in 1999, there was a lot of vacant space on Central Avenue. And what has happened in the last 20 years is folks who are willing to put in the sweat equity to be mom and pop businesses, that 100 hours a week per person, including the kids, that kind of work, they found opportunity in those spaces. And so from where I live, I can walk to, basically this is one block space. A friend of mine, Drew Swope, calls it the International Kilometer, not the International Mile. I can walk to a wonderful Bosnian grocery store with a little restaurant that serves these sausage sandwiches. It has also the best European chocolate selection in Charlotte. Can walk down from there to Soul Central, which is it looks like an American soul food place, and it is, except on Saturdays, the owners are from Trinidad, and they have wonderful curries and the roti bread. And then just beyond that, there's Abu Gita, which is Ethiopian food, and across the street is a dim sum place and a new Vietnamese bakery with these little French pastries, and I didn't have dinner. And isn't this amazing?
You're making us all very hungry.
Isn't this an amazing thing? If you grew up in this area, if you've been here more than about 20 years, it's beautiful.
So, Tom, while I've got you, so neighborhoods are interesting. A couple people that I've asked what's beautiful about Charlotte, they'll start naming the neighborhoods. Some people's minds rush to Myers Park, but there are a lot of beautiful neighborhoods in Charlotte. Talk some about kind of the history of neighborhoods. So you wrote about when people used to live close together back in the day, but then also kind of sort of the relics of those neighborhoods that we still enjoy the beauty
This
of.
is very much a city of neighborhoods, and it has been since the streetcar ran out to 400 acres of farmland way south of the city, a place they called Dilworth. That's the 1890s. And we developed these streetcar suburbs around the center city, and then after World War II, automobile suburbs. I'm kind of surprised you're leading me in this direction, because what I'm going to say in just a minute is tree canopy.
It's a thing.
The folks that built those early suburbs believed in greenery. A fellow named D.A. Tompkins, who built the Charlotte Observer into a daily, very much a proponent of this new South, the South that reinvents itself and reinvents itself. Right after 1900, he said, we need a park, which was foolish, because you didn't need a park. You just walked to the edge of town. It's about 10 minutes away. There's all the nature you need out there. And he said, no, we need a park. And they built the Elizabeth Park, the Independence Park in Elizabeth. And he liked that so much, he brought in a Harvard-trained landscape architect named John Nolan. First project Nolan ever did anywhere in the United States. Went on to do 400 projects, probably the most important landscape architect in the early 20th century. In Charlotte, his masterpiece, which he wrote about nationally, which continues to inspire neighborhoods around the United States, is Myers Park. But a key part of Myers Park was the trees. When I came here, I assumed this had been a forest, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they just put houses in it. It was cotton fields. They put the trees in, and then they put the parks in, and then they put the houses in. And that notion that you can greenify a city keeps coming up again and again and again. In the 1980s, Charlotte invested in a city arborist, and they planted trees on Tryon Street. Imagine the foolishness. And today, in the summer, Tryon Street is this cool green place. I was just talking with Pat Garrett, who helped create Bright Walk. If you haven't been to Bright Walk, an amazing neighborhood on Statesville Avenue, very mixed income, and it's on the old Double Oaks low-income housing site. It's got a lot of low-income folks, a lot of non-low-income folks, but it has the trees. The trees that were there from the Double Oaks era are still there on Double Oaks Avenue. So all of our neighborhoods have this love of trees, and that's what Vi Lyles, I think, sees when she jets in and out, looking down at that tree canopy.
Lisa and I lived kind of near Myers Park, and a year and a half ago we moved to Plaza Midwood. it was interesting because some people who live in Myers Park, it sounded to them it was like we had moved to Vermont or something. Plaza Midwood, that just seemed exotic. And I'm convinced that a lot of our people who are Myers Park people don't get around town very much. And you're missing out because you don't get around town very much. You kind of stay in your own neighborhood for various reasons. Molly and I have talked a couple times about just kind of the West Side in general, which sometimes is viewed as kind of it's an object of pity and, oh, it's a fearful place. Talk about the West Side. Part of our church's business has been to try to preserve housing and neighborhoods. Our ministry with QC Family Tree and so on. Talk about
I love
that.
the West Side. If you're not going to the West Side of Charlotte, you're missing out. I live in the West Side of Charlotte. I work in the West Side of Charlotte. WBTV is past B of A Stadium, past Moorhead and Freedom. It's been called Freemore West as of late. South End is big and popular, and hopefully Freemore West, its goal is to get a really well-known name as well, because Freemore West would be Freedom Drive, Moorhead Street in West Charlotte. My husband and I chose to live in West Charlotte. In fact, the first townhome I bought when I moved to the job in 2003 for WBTV, I rented an apartment for a while, and then the first townhome I bought a couple years later was on Grandin Road in West Charlotte because it was close to work. And I came to Charlotte originally as a stepping stone in the broadcast journalism business. You sort of move up, and my goal was to get to 60 Minutes and save the world. I'm very happy in Charlotte now, and I think I'll be here for a while. But originally, I just thought, okay, well, I'll get a townhome, and in Grandin Road, there was no Pinkies, there was no, what is even there now, Burger Company, Rhino Market. There's all these businesses and restaurants, and there was nothing. In fact, there was Open Kitchen. Right? That was it. That's still there. I meet a lot of people who are like, I had my prom in the 50s at Open Kitchen. But that was it. And now the West Side has grown and grown and grown. And when my husband and I got married and bought our first house, we looked all over Charlotte. We didn't care if it was turnkey ready or find an old historic home and renovate from the ground up. We just wanted a good lot and some certain things that spoke to us. And we looked, I'm telling you, all over Mecklenburg County. And we landed back in West Charlotte. And it's a beautiful place, but I will say, I'm white, I'm blonde, and a lot of people assume I live in South Charlotte. And I don't. And it's a really huge thing, I think, for Charlotteans to continue to branch out, to go to all those places you mentioned, Tom, on Central Avenue. I wonder how many people in here didn't know half of the spaces you mentioned, because sometimes it's hard for us, because we are such a city of neighborhoods in my mind, to get out of our neighborhoods and see other neighborhoods and see other parts and not be scared of them or judgmental of them, because there are so many beautiful parts of it. And West Charlotte, I feel like, is one of them. And I love being a part of that diverse part of Charlotte.
You know, Willie Ratchford runs the city community relations and has done this for years and years. When I asked him this question, he said that what's beautiful about Charlotte is when people who don't know each other sit down, and maybe they're from different parts of town, and maybe they look different, and they have a conversation with each other, and they discover, hey, we're both people. We both have dreams. We both have fears. We both have, so that kind of, you're a newscaster while I got you before I go to Harvey. People complain about the news. And they say it's biased and everything, but the part I'm interested in, though, is how people say, the kind of, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so people wish we had more good news. Do you have any perspective on that? Like, there must be beautiful things happening in Charlotte. I know you guys try to touch on some of that, but...
I have tons of perspective on that, actually.
Funny
you should ask. No, I do think there was a huge... Well, first of all, there's 5 TV stations in town, and each TV station probably, everyone's reporting the news, but they probably have its own different feel and vibe. That doesn't mean political opinion or stance. It means a different vibe of where they're going with things, and sort of a... You find a station you like, and you generally watch that station because you like it, maybe for a reason you don't even know. We have taken at BTV, and I have friends at all the stations, so it's not a slam on any other station. It's just sort of the place I work. We have taken a stance of, we have a good news segment. We try and do really good storytelling. And so it's not always, if it bleeds, it leads. And I can specifically speak to the 11 p.m. show, which I solo anchor. So this is my dinner break, and I'm going back to work after this. And every day we meet at 3 o'clock in our editorial meeting to decide what we think we'll end up covering at 11 o'clock, unless things change. And specifically starting last year, January of 2019, when Paul Cameron and Delana Little retired. Paul had been there 37 years and Delana had been there 30, so 67 years of experience walked out of our station. And they're both my great friends, and they're both such talented people and well-known names in our community. And so when they left, we made different decisions to try and make sure you guys, viewers, felt like you weren't losing out on your content, and sort of like addition by subtraction. And we made a really specific decision at 11, turning to a single female show, to have a lot of storytelling. So if it's crime, like 2019 had a high homicide rate, that's just a fact. How do we tell those stories? You tell them with humanity. You don't tell them with blue lights flashing, crime, 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 cops, 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 shooting, shooting, shooting. You talk about the people that have been impacted. Somebody was hurt or violently killed. That's a person, and they have family. And so when you're talking about stories, not everything can be shiny good news. We try very hard to tell a lot of different good news, featurey good news. Sometimes you can't avoid the fact that we live in a world where crime is happening. It's how you tell it and how you make people care about it that we think makes the biggest impact. And it's been a conscious decision to do that, and it is harder to do, candidly. It's easier to show up and just show crime scene tape, right? Almost like wallpaper video that means nothing. And we think showing people, because Charlotte is filled with all kinds of people, is more important.
We have in the series, we have a guy coming in February named Ray Barfield. He's a doctor, teaches at Duke. We partner with the Levine Children's Hospital to bring him here. And he's going to do a program on beauty and suffering, which is really interesting. And I think a lot of times in the teeth of suffering, we see beauty that we would not see otherwise. We're going to talk about that more. Harvey, I want to ask you, if you don't mind, when we had lunch together at Intermezzo, after you said you didn't want to talk about buildings and trees and so on, you told me a story about the first day you came to Charlotte. Would you tell these folks that?
I didn't realize you were going to ask me to say that.
It was such a good story.
But I want to start a different way.
That's fine. That's fine. But I want to get to it.
I do want to go back to this canopy of trees that we all learn in Politics 101 when we get elected to the city council. But there is something very special about that canopy of trees. Because what God has done is made the city equal in lots of ways. And I recall taking people who were in my graduate school class in Boston. They came down to Charlotte, and they wanted me to show them the city. And I showed them the city, all of it. But I started in what we would call the poorest part of the city, and just drove them around. And the common thing that held all of these neighborhoods together was, in fact, the trees that looked just as good in Northwood Estates as they did in Myers Park. And near the end of the trip, someone said, well, you haven't showed us the slums yet. I said, yes, I did. It was the first place that I went. Had the lowest income housing, and we considered it an at-risk neighborhood. So, but the trees have done something, and I hear that theme throughout this panel. It's done something to sort of equalize the environment. Now, certainly all those people living in all those different places don't have the same outcomes in terms of their efforts every day. But what you do have to admire is that it is an environment from which you can build a life. I can imagine places around this country that are a whole lot worse, in which if you're starting at the bottom of the ladder, the scene is so bleak and so unbeautiful that getting that first leg up on the ladder becomes tougher. I think what I'm really trying to say is that nature in such a way has equalized all of these communities in terms of the natural assets that they have. Because Charlotte doesn't have a beautiful oceanfront like Miami, or a river, or a backdrop of the Rocky Mountains that we have in Denver. We have nothing but flat land with, well, relatively flat. Well, we're in the Piedmont, so the foothills and the rolling terrain producing these wonderful deciduous trees mixed in with pines. And you can't find a more glorious spring or a more glorious fall than you can right here in this area. And I think it does a lot to lift the spirits of the poorest of us and cause the richest of us to think about that. And I want to come back to that theme later on. The story you asked me to tell, which gets to what I really think is beautiful about Charlotte, is this one. Cindy and I left Clemson one beautiful spring day near the end of my graduation from Clemson to interview with an architectural firm here. And we drove down Wilkinson Boulevard into Charlotte in 1965. And there were lots of signs, some of you old enough will remember the motels that you used to have that you just walk up to, the parking lots right alongside the rooms. And I felt, we came up the day before to get a room that night so that I'd be ready for my interview the next morning. And I rode down Wilkinson Boulevard, and I kept stopping at places, and they kept saying, "We have no vacancy, we have no vacancy, we have no vacancy." And I started saying to myself, not to my wife, that, is this the right place I want to be interviewing for a job? I can't find any rooms. And we knew there were vacancies. There were no signs that said no vacancy. All those hotels along Wilkinson, they're not there anymore. I was beginning to panic a little bit as afternoon turned into early evening and then darkness. And then I got on I-85, not wanting to admit to Cindy that we might have to spend the night in the car. We had a little green 1960 Falcon. I remember that so clearly. Not a lot of room. And Sonia, who many of you remember, was our baby. And she was no more than 3-4 weeks old.
Wow.
And I started driving down I-85 and just said, you know what, I'm going to stop at this Howard Johnson. Said a little prayer. Said, I just hope this guy doesn't tell me he doesn't have a room. And I decided this time, rather than leave Cindy and Sonia in the car, I was going to take them along. I was doing everything I could to prey upon the sympathy of whoever the desk clerk was. And the desk clerk looked at me, looked at my family. I said, do you have a room here tonight? He paused, looked at his books, and then came back to me with the best smile and says, yes, we do. That to me was beautiful. It said there were people in Charlotte with a conscience, and maybe his company had a policy, I hope, that said since the passing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, this is 1965, and that act said public accommodations were open to everybody. Well, perhaps the company was not as hard as those companies on Wilkinson Boulevard in terms of ignoring the law. But whatever it is, I could see in his face that he knew he was doing the right thing. And you know what? That said more to me about what Charlotte was going to be about than all those rejections I had along Wilkinson Boulevard. And we spent the night and I got the job the next day. And
Thanks be to God. We would add, let me ask something else along the line. I'm going to ask Hannah Hassan to read a poem for us. There's a guy named Vernon Burton. I don't know if you know Vernon. He's a historian, also teaches at Clemson. He has grandchildren in our church, so he's here pretty often. Vernon and I have gotten to be real good friends. So he heard that Harvey was coming. He sent me an article that he wrote about Harvey's matriculation to Clemson University in 1963. It was about 50 pages long. It was complicated. But he told a story about when you got there, the people had rebel flags. People were people, they were like Southern white people. And but he told about when you went into the dining room for the first meal, and there was a lot of racket and opposition. But at least in his article, he said Harvey got the best dessert and a larger piece of meat. And the reason is what he saw in that cafeteria were his people, who were, of course, the workers in that cafeteria, and how moved they were because they saw in him what their child perhaps could be one day. So there's this beauty of seeing potential. There's this beauty of seeing what is not. Yeah, so I want to go. Brenda Tapia is a good friend of mine. She's ordained Presbyterian. When I asked Brenda what's beautiful about Charlotte, she said the tenacity and determination of black women.
I love that.
And she talked about Sarah Stevenson, a bunch of people. Talk about courageous, any of you, courageous, determined, beautiful people.
I think there are. I agree with that statement. We don't give black women as much credit as we need to give them in terms of what they have done to become the glue that holds the community together, particularly the black community. But there is a beloved community out there also. There are a group of people across this city that have the kind of spirit that says, we can be different. There is so much potential. The woman in the film said that. There is so much potential here to do and to make this a very special place. There are enough people who see us as not being too large or too small. That's the perspective I come from. That says we ought to experiment and do things to, in fact, figure out how we can live together a little better than some other places. Years ago, Charlotte, when I got here, always aspired to be like Atlanta. I mean, we were never satisfied with ourselves. We always wanted the bigger this or to be as big as, and so forth and so on. But maybe we missed the boat, that there are some special things that we did way back then that we can do, that we're doing better today, and we can do better even tomorrow. Quick example. In the late 60s, 5 civil rights leaders' homes were bombed. The typical response by most southern cities was not like what Charlotte did. Most would have gone into their various silos back in the 60s and maybe punched at each other in different ways to make political points or whatever. This community came together, the mayor and the leaders in the black community, and they held a big event at the Ovens Auditorium, or one of the big auditoriums in town, and said, that's not who we are. When it was time to integrate the lunch counters, this community, led by its political leaders, said, let's get the black political leaders over here, and let's all go to lunch together and do better about that. Let's not have the social conflagration that we see in other places. Now, a lot of that was driven by the notion that we want to be a great city business-wise. But the point I'm wanting to make is, progressively through the years, when the parents got together and decided that Judge McMillan had given an order to bus, they figured out a way to do it They elected a school board that allowed for a period of 20 years of school desegregation, which led the nation. We got more attention for that than any skyscrapers we could have built downtown. Okay, that went away. Then there was the recent study on being 50 out of 50 in terms of economic mobility. And then this beloved community got together again and said, we can't allow that to happen. And they started off, and they've come up with a great report, and now the point I'm making is that progressively we get a little bit better off, but we still got to do a little bit more, quite a bit more, to be that very special city. But without the DNA that we built into our culture, I want to keep calling it what Martin Luther King used to call it, the beloved community, a combination of white and blacks in this city who see we have a problem. We're not going to be better off by pulling apart. We're going to be better off by figuring out a way, step by step, of coming together. We're not there yet. You know, we do things, we get excited about a particular cause, then a lot of times we fall away from that cause. But I think each generation gets more intentional about how important it is. That's why I love seeing young people today pushing climate change and some of these issues. Not some of us old fogies who probably won't live or think we're not going to live long enough to see the real dangers, but the young people who are going to be affected by it are leading that charge. So we are getting better and better and better at coming together, and to me, that's what's beautiful about this place.
He looked at me when he said old fogey. I don't know. So Molly and Tom, this DNA thing, right? Other beautiful lives, or what's in the soil here that gives us, that's beautiful, that gives us hope for the future, something in the past. What have you?
Charles Jones just passed away. Some of you know Charles Jones. He was 22 years old at Johnson C. Smith University. One of those kids that you grow up and he's a good talker. And he just keeps talking and keeps talking. And he'd harness that so that he was able to talk to people and have them understand what he was saying. He and two friends put together the sit-in movement at Johnson C. Smith University. Just a few days after the one in Greensboro, they called a meeting. They figured a dozen folks would show up, and 200 students marched from Johnson C. Smith down in effort to open up the lunch counters. One of the biggest sit-ins ever. And that was one day, and then they did it again the next day, and then they did it again the next day, and then for 6 months. And Charlotte didn't blow up, partly because Charles Jones was such a good talker, partly because B.B. Delane's uncle, Moses Belton, was the communications director who ate lunch with a lot of the Chamber of Commerce people. That's why that piece worked, because of Moses Belton. But also because the people in Charlotte were willing to listen. And being willing to listen is something that we need to cultivate, but something that has paid us well when we've done that. And the fact that the civil rights movement here, the sit-ins in particular, were met by the white mayor sitting together with African Americans and coming up with something called the Friendly Relations Committee. Doesn't that sound just wow? And it turned into the Community Relations Office, which is still around. It was a national model. I just found a series of letters, 1963, between the Kennedys and the folks here about Charlotte being a national model for what became the '64 Civil Rights Act. So because people talked and listened, in the past, we didn't blow up, and so that worry that is in the ground in many communities, much less here than other places.
I mean, one panelist that I'd hoped to get, the only person who said no to me, was Sally Robinson. And Sally's one of, she was Sally Dalton, grew up right next to the church, great family. And Sally's one of those people that I love to hear talk about when integration came to Charlotte. And busing, which now seems to be a dirty word. We have a whole cluster of people who still live in Charlotte who are so proud of what we pulled together and did as a community then. I mean, some of the greatest pride that I've ever heard articulated in this community. I love to hear people like that talk about something that happened where we did the right thing and we're proud of it and it's stamped in the DNA. Molly, what would you say about that?
Well, my perspective is more current day. Harvey, you're a part of Charlotte's, the fabric of our city. You really are in the history, and Tom, you study our city. I've been here 16 years, and my job is to immerse myself in current day headlines of what's happening to our city now. And if you're asking about our people, who I think are beautiful in so many different ways, look at our Charlotte City Council. Whether you voted or not for who's on there, 3 years ago, I guess, when we changed all the council, was it 3 years ago? 4 years ago? What year are we, 2020? We made national headlines because we had a younger looking, more different looking council than not only the council members they replaced, but than most city councils and town councils across the country. And our city, our people voted those people in, and whether it continues to look diverse and different or continues to go back looking all one way, whatever way that might be, that's something I think as a city we can be proud of and is really beautiful. We have so many charities in this city that fight for all people, disabled people, sick people, different races, different genders. We fight for people, and there's so many grassroots starting like right here or right over there or right over there that aren't tied to national huge organizations that are started in Charlotte for Charlotteans, and I get to see that so much getting out in the community, and I think that that is really beautiful. And when I also think about current day beauty, it's more like a test for us as we look ahead to 2020. But we had the DNC in 2012, and Charlotte was beautiful and shown and was really a standout city. And we succeeded with that. And we have the RNC coming in the next 8 months. And Charlotte is planning on trying to put its best foot forward and absolutely shine again, no matter what your political affiliation is or whether you appreciate this jersey or that jersey. The fact that our city wants to have a DNC and an RNC and just show off our city says something about the people leading our city and the people, all of us, who are going to be here living it and getting ready to represent our city no matter what comes down the pike. We didn't know in 2012 what was coming, and we don't know what's coming in 2020. I will say, I work a lot with CMPD, and they have this program that Chief Karputney had implemented called Bridging the Difference. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. And it was to bridge the difference in Charlotte and have all these communities and neighborhoods come together over the 18 months leading up to August 2020. And if you are interested, I know they had been asking for what they're going to call Charlotte ambassadors, basically volunteers, us, anyone, whoever, to represent Charlotte when we have tens of thousands of people in all walks of life come in to either say, we love that the RNC's here, or we hate that the RNC's here. Either way, we need a lot of volunteers and ambassadors for people already here representing our city and who love our city and want to help make us look beautiful, and volunteering to help all these people coming in. So I think we have a lot of beauty all the time with our people in different charities and just how we're represented in different headlines, and we have a big test coming this year as well.
Can I comment on the downtown or the center city, the RNC and the DNC? And I'm the oldest person here, Tom, right? Back in 1965 when I moved here, the first thing I did was to work at Odell Associates, and we worked on the downtown plan for Charlotte. And every single plan, all the way through the 2020 vision plan, I've had a little bit to do with it. And it's been interesting to see how beautiful that vision back in 65 that Odell had evolved into the city we now know today. But there are two things along the way to the 2012 DNC convention and the upcoming 2020 convention that I think are going to be interesting to you. In 1992, we were fortunate enough to get the NC2A's basketball national tournament Arkansas played somebody, and so Bill Clinton, they played Duke. In the Final Four.
I was there.
Were you there?
Yeah.
Okay. We did something because we're so innovative a group of people that we felt that while the Coliseum out on Tyvola Road was our crown jewel, in a sense, as a place, there was nothing else around it. And so what did we do? We created a movie set in Center City. We made retail spaces. Tom, do you remember that? We literally created a downtown out of nothing. That's how aspiring we were, and business people thought that was great. But it really wasn't real. It really wasn't real. And it says as much about aspirations and what we wanted to become that we worked very hard to, in fact, create a Center City that a lot of people are very proud of. It's compact, it's dense, it's got lots of good things. It lacks only a few things now. The trees were replanted, Tom, and everything looks terrific. And I know it went that way, not because I'm a Democrat, but the Democrats who came in 2012 said, we really like your city, Harvey. And we really like your city. Why? Because everything is close together and we can walk to everything. And we don't have to be bussed in from 20 miles out to get to everything. And you people did a great job. And we did, as a community, have that vision to build that kind of a city. The 2020 convention's probably, from another standpoint, going to be even better in terms of facilities. But people now have a fear that other things are going to happen that may, in fact, besmirch the image of our city. I don't have that fear. I think we're going to overcome that in the same way we have overcome a lot of other stuff. And that's, again, what's beautiful about Charlotte, that we're taking the necessary precautions. We've got the people in place, and it's going to be okay. Because people around the world will get to see us, not because we've got more high-rises and more skyscrapers and other kinds of things, but because the people who caused those things to happen, their DNA is going to spread through the entire crowd and make us better. That's what makes us beautiful.
The word grassroots has come up a couple of times. I've had this realization since I started doing this. I told some people I'm talking about beauty, whom should I talk to? And every day I'm talking to 8 new people that I didn't know existed. So a year ago, if you'd asked me, all cities do this. They try to create, enhance beauty. They have things that we have, like we have museums downtown. Harvey, you live in a city that's got a museum with your name on it. That just must be, that must be amazing. They named a storage closet here for me. It's great. And so we have museums, and you have a symphony, and you have an opera. Those are the things that cities do to be creative and preserve beauty. Well, lo and behold, if you get to the grassroots level, there's all kind of stuff going on in this city. Music programs and painting programs and photography programs, grassroots in all kinds of neighborhoods, absolutely amazing. And one person who does amazing stuff in this connection is named Hannah Hassan. Asked Hannah, it's interesting, Hannah, she's one of the just forces for good and wonder and beauty in our city. She's a poet, she's a storyteller, she's an activist, she's in the middle of so much that's good. And I ran into her at some event, I don't know what it was one of these small arts groups, and I just started my interview. So I came up to Hannah and I said, I want to ask you what's beautiful about Charlotte. And I think she said, I ain't telling you now. And she said, I want to write a poem. Nobody else has answered in this way. And it took her a while, but finally she said, I've got the poem. So Lisa and I rode out to her house, and she did the poem. and I was just annihilated. It's one of the most amazing things. So I asked her to come tonight and read her poem. So Hannah, if you'd come.
Good evening. I want to point out that it did not take me a while to write the poem. I wrote it in the shower. It took me a while for us to get together. I believe that if the poem don't come right away, then it ain't coming. I have spent many a day questioning her future, calling her out and calling her in. I have publicly challenged her choices, criticized her politically, charged her to do better. We have a complicated relationship, and ultimately it's because I love her and want her to win. I believe in her. I believe in the possibility of what she can become. She is beautiful now, but that beauty is often a mirage. She is powerful to many, but those within her inner circle acknowledge the facade, know what's under, beneath the surface, in the ground, her roots. We see her secrets, and yet we still love her despite the difficulties of her truth. See, she is our Charlotte, the city that has opened herself to give us the place that we call home. We have found a sanctuary within her borders. This is where we build our legacy and our memories, where we deepen our connections and find spaces to grow and belong. And because she is ours, we have earned the right to challenge her and demand her growth. Because she belongs to us, we will hold her to higher standards. We want a city that raises the bar and breaks the mold, opens its arms with opportunity and hope, creates spaces for the most vulnerable within her city to heal and cope. You see, there is no denying that there is an abundance of love here, an overpowering belief in the future of this place. There are people here who make it easy to love here, people who have opened their homes and their hearts, people who continuously keep and hold space, for this is our city, the place that we will keep fighting for, the place that we will continue to build. This is our city, home to some of the most beautiful and interesting spaces, a city that makes you feel hope, a city that encourages you to dream, a city that is promising and passionate, a city that gives you space to believe, and that's how love works. That's what loving Charlotte means. It's examining the truth of her history and working towards an uplifting legacy. That is where we see her light, and that is where we see her beauty. It is nestled in the details, hidden in the open spaces. It is seen in the nighttime in that beautiful skyline. It is within those who have given to her for multiple generations. Those who have lived here because they've had no choice but to live here. For how can we discuss the beautiful of Charlotte and not honor her natives and the ancestors and elders who have built the foundation? For a city that honors where she has grown from is a city that is prepared for future greatness. And as for me, I only want to live in a city, grow and build in a city, work and love in a city that is willing to do the absolute most to ensure that all living here are living up to their God-given potential. I only want to claim a city, stamp me and my family's last name to a city that chases freedom and equality in a way that is monumental. For this is a city that has the ability to transform the way that we all live with radical love. This is a city that holds on to the ability to push far past minimal expectations and be even more amazing than the things our wildest dreams are made of. Our Charlotte, a city of opportunity, booming with creativity and everything that she needs to take things to the next level. with an abundance of raw talent, and all of these people with fresh concepts and new ideas of imaginative work to be done. Charlotte is beautiful. She's so very beautiful, not solely for what she is or has been, but Charlotte is beautiful for who she is destined to become. Thank you.
I told you that was good. Hannah, that is absolutely marvelous. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'd like a copy of that or whatever. So again, we have a Facebook page. We have an Instagram account. It's CLT Beautiful. We're going to post that on video tomorrow on both of those, and we'll put out a copy of her words. And that's absolutely beautiful, and it captures so much of the spirit of what we all care about in this room. Thank you. It's wonderful. Folks, we've been here about an hour, but I'm going to, if you got to go, you got to go. But I want to keep talking a little bit longer. Molly, let me ask you, what is the most, is this a fair question? What's the most beautiful story you've covered?
Oh, I don't know if you have to have the most beautiful, but there are so many. There really are so many. Again, it's kind of in how you're telling the news and how you're adding humanity to it, but there are like good news and happy news, and there's all these features, and there's stuff that could be categorized a certain way. But for me, I end up doing a lot with children in our community and our two major hospitals, and I think there's something remarkably, almost indescribable in its beauty in how kids sometimes who have really huge uphill medical battles, who are 3 and 4 and 5 or 6, seem to have a sense about them that is more mature and adult-like than me, than certainly another child who is their same age. I really find beauty in like the people that you're talking to for a story, but also when you go into people and you interview people, whether it's adults and families or children in a hospital that have struggles and maybe things that we might think were like a sad story or an obstacle in their way, and the attitude rises them above and it sticks with you. It's truly not like, oh, here's one perfect story I can say is beautiful. It's the people and individual stories that resonate. And I mean that. You could watch the news yesterday or tonight or next week, and there could be sort of a nondescript story or something that by itself wouldn't be memorable, but then you hear someone talking about it in the story, whatever it is, and they stick with you because their perspective is beautiful and their hope is beautiful. And I really think there's so many people in Charlotte that have this perspective that you end up finding and hearing from, and when you're able to put them on a bigger platform, and show it, whether it's social media or on TV, it's pretty awesome.
And you've been involved with like children's cancer, is that right?
A lot of different, I always say I follow kids and do a lot with kids with uphill medical battles, so it's not just cancer, it could be rare genetic disorders or born as preemies or heart conditions. Sort of side note, but I've talked to a doctor once that said there's no such thing as a rare disease because there's so many different rare diseases that everything becomes like an orphan disease, that they're all just sort of in the same group, becoming millions of people with individual rare diseases. So I never try and say it's a rare genetic disorder or something. It's like someone that just lives with something that's different. But it doesn't have to be critically ill. It doesn't have to be, it could be living with autism every day or having juvenile diabetes, just kids that have different obstacles.
I know I spent some time with Mike Collins. I've been on his show a number of times. And I asked him what's beautiful about Charlotte. I said, don't say the tree canopy. Of course, he said the tree canopy. But anyway, Mike does this show every summer called Charlotte Squawks, where we laugh at ourselves. Although I've on several occasions, they've been making fun of somebody that I love dearly, and it's uncomfortable. Anyway, one year, this is amazing. they did a song about the guy that looks like Pat McCrory. I forget the actor's name. Anyway, and he sang the song about I just don't get the Greenway. It was kind of bashing the Greenway. And I thought that was funny. And the next day, I was on the Greenway, and we forget that we have a major medical center. We have major medical centers in our city, and if you go down the Greenway, who you will see are people that they've got a loved one in one of those hospitals, and they're in day 34 of a titanic battle. So I was on my bike, and I had an occasion just to stop, and there was a guy sitting there, and I just, said hi. And he wound up telling me his wife had suffered this terrible aneurysm. It had been lingering near death. And he was just, we just talked. I put my arm around him. I said I was a pastor. He had higher hopes than he should have. But took some comfort from that, and I prayed with him. And we forget that. And there is so much beauty in that. I mean, Ray Barfield's going to talk about beauty and suffering, and that's a real thing. Molly, in your book, you wrote about, it's a mom book, but at the end of the book, she talks about her mother's death. And in talking about that, you said what that moment shows you is that life is beautiful.
I'm so impressed you read it. Thank you.
Oh, it was lovely. And
I did find that, though. I did find, I wrote part of the book in the hospice house with my mom, just because you're there and you've got time, and you're looking for something to do other than sit there and think. And so I was distracted by my own words, which was a wonderful way to distract myself. And ended up being actually a really beautiful way, because by the end it was kind of like, life is full circle, and I was there with my mom writing about my own kids.
Beauty and loss. Tom, you're a historian. I hope this is an odd question. If you could take us back in time, I always think about time travel. That'd be fun to do. What's some beautiful moment in Charlotte's history, way back, any time, that you would say that was a really beautiful day?
I would take you back. I meant to look up this day. I was hoping you were going to ask something like that. This was, I think, October 1st of 2019.
That's not very far back.
It was a Sunday. Sunday and a Saturday. It was a whole weekend where Tryon Street was closed. Tryon Street closed again because there was a cultural festival, another cultural festival. Well, it wasn't one cultural festival, it was two cultural festivals. North Tryon Street was the Indian festival. Folks from India, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, all those different cultures. And I walked along there, and there were thousands of people I didn't know, but there were some folks I did know, which was amazing for a kid growing up in the South, where, the exotic thing was to go to Shakey's Pizza because they had Italian food. On the other end was the Ola Festival, the Latin American festival. And I knew some people there. And it was fun watching these people walk back and forth, Indian people walking into Latino land, Latino people walking into Indian land, but mostly Southerners being in this New South. And a generation ago, that would have been hard to imagine. Most parts of the world, those people would have been shooting at each other. Not those particular people. I don't think they're close enough to have shot at each other. But the way a lot of the world handles ethnic difference is through fear and hate and anger. And that's not what was going on Tryon Street on that day, way back in 2019.
This vision of the streets downtown in 1904 or something. I have a friend named David Erdman, who's a lawyer here in town, and he's a collector of old photos of Charlotte. I'm going to get him to come sometime during the series. He's got all these splendid photos of old buildings that don't exist anymore. It's absolutely amazing. Harvey, let me ask you a question that, this is odd. Is there such a thing as So leadership matters. Grassroots stuff matters, right? That's a different kind of leadership that we're realizing. This stuff comes up from the grassroots, and that's big. That's how the world really changes. But leadership matters. Is there such a thing as beautiful leadership? We see a lot of, obviously, ugly leadership. And it doesn't matter which side. It doesn't matter which side. It's not about sides and parties, right? But is there such a thing as beautiful? Is that a possible thing?
Yes, there is, in my mind. I've seen pastors who are beautiful leaders, drawing from the grassroots and bringing people together. I've seen political leaders who lead an orchestra made up of string section, brass section, what other sections there are. And they cause harmony to come forth. I won't name some of those leaders for want of maybe leaving some of them out. But the people who lead best, in my opinion, who are beautiful leaders, cause people to see a vision and share in that vision. The leader may have a vision, but they endeavor to bring everybody along. And they do that by listening well, by allowing others to participate in it, so that everybody claims ownership to it. And it is much like a symphony conductor. The result is beautiful music, beautiful leadership. Unfortunately, my own opinion, others may have, I don't see a lot of that today. And I sometimes wonder if technology, social media, the fact that we live our lives in silos where we have our own sets of beliefs, makes that beautiful leader have to work even harder to break down the walls that exist. And I'm not citing myself as a beautiful leader, but I do recall making a statement once when someone was saying something derogatory about a political associate of mine, that they want to build a better Charlotte too. And they have a vision of what that is. And I might have a vision of what that is. Isn't it better for us to try to get together and see if we can't meld those two visions into one vision of what this community ought to be? I think that's what I'm saying. People who can do that, people who are gifted to do that, bringing people together and hearing them and listening well, can make a difference.
You know, I sometimes get in conversations with people and they complain about our political leaders, and I remind them we do still live in a democracy and we have the leaders that we have voted for. We choose who's there, right? So to have beautiful leadership, I mean, is there a way? So one of my premises is, I remember last year I go to everything downtown, doesn't matter what it is. And sometimes I get dinged for going to it, right? So I went to the Gay Pride Festival, and I had a shirt that identified me as a clergy person. And so somebody I did not know came up and said, "I can't believe a pastor is here." And I said, "Well, I'm here." And he hugged me and said, "My dad's a pastor, and he doesn't love me." I said, "Well, I love you." But here's what I'm getting to. He said, "Come with me." So he grabbed my arm, and he took me down to, they have these booths there. And there's a booth, and it had a curtain over it, and it said, behind this curtain is the most beautiful person in the world. And you pull back the curtain, there's a mirror, right? It's like, that's good. I love that. And on Sunday, those of you who were here, I was talking about beauty. And the cool thing is that's all kinds of people told me this week that I am beautiful, and I'll take it all day long. It's great. We kind of have permission to say that to each other. So I think, how do we become beautiful charlatans, right? Because if each one of us could be a beautiful charlatan or realize the beautiful charlatans that we are, like, that'd be an amazing thing, right? Somebody like Chris Hood, Chris here, he did this art that we've used as our logo. I absolutely love that. It's kind of playful and fun and beautiful and really captures it's got the tree canopy in it, of course. It's great. And Chris is a beautiful person, and he married beautiful Emily a year ago. And there was so many, but how do we realize that? How do we live into that? Because there's so much that would draw ugliness out of us, right? There's so much that would say, be tough like everybody else. You know what I'm saying? How do we create beautiful charlatans? Do you have any?
Naturally, I think we just sort of are. I think if you run into someone or walking down the street, some people say hello. I mean, if you're like fighting for the same parking space, maybe you're not saying hello, but generally if you're walking in areas, we are a friendly city, and anyone that's been able to travel to other cities, sometimes you find other friendly cities. Of course, the Southeast has a really great, wonderful reputation for that, but not every city is friendly naturally. And maybe it's because we have such a cross-section of people. What is it, like 55 people now move to Charlotte a day? I forget what the chamber latest number was. I think when I moved here in 2003, it was 49, and now it's like 55 to 61. But regardless, we're growing. The growth adds more people here all the time. So if when you go out and you're somewhere you don't know a lot of people or a party, and it's like, well, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? And so Charlotte is built and made up of a lot of people that have to make friends and have to talk to people to get to know their city, which has made us, by nature, I think, someone who's not born and raised here or been here since the 80s, beautiful.
But you're referring to that beloved community I talk about, the friendliness, the people who have a smile on their faces, and people who are less ridden by fear. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason that we're not always brotherly or sisterly is we have different degrees of fear, and that stretches particularly across racial lines. I recognize that the mother raising her child in one of our challenged neighborhoods experiences a different kind of world in the ins and outs of what that person does every day. And it's often dictated by fear of others, of what it is she is, and her fear of the persecution that might come as a result of her skin color. And I know that to be true, and it goes back, Jim, to people having a difficult time loving. Someone asked me about my faith, and I said, there are really two things that stand out for me, at least, and it is loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor, like love God and love your neighbor. We all know that here in this room. But how difficult that is to do. And so when someone says, I don't like so-and-so and so-and-so, and if you dig deep enough, that person is absolutely fearful of something happening to them. And they may not believe that God loves them or that all their neighbors love them in such a way. Maybe even their parents didn't love them. But fear, in my opinion, is the thing that keeps us all from becoming a bigger, beloved community.
I wonder about a last thing. Y'all can talk about anything you want, of course. It's been wonderful.
Good job.
So I think about Martin Luther King a lot, and he did a couple things. When he talked about public issues, he talked about love, which you don't hear politicians do too much nowadays. But when he would talk about the nation, when he would talk about crises, he would talk about love, and that's amazing. And I think in the city of Charlotte, we want to be a city of love. We want to be a city where we love each other. The other thing that King talked about were dreams. He dared us to dream, not his dream, but God's dream, the nation's dream, I don't know. If you had a beautiful dream for Charlotte, what would that be? All three of you love this city. Mm-hmm. What would your dream for Charlotte be?
As a newscaster, my gut reaction is to get through August of 2020. So I don't know if that's appropriate to say, but I guess I could say this part. My daughter's 8 years old. She's in 3rd grade. My son will be in kindergarten next year, and she goes to a Charlotte-Mecklenburg school. And it's a very diverse school, and we love it. And I completely agree about the fear thing and different people in different silos having different perspectives on where you live. And it goes back to how you started, Tom, on all those wonderful places off Central Avenue. Do we even know of them, and have we gotten out of our own neighborhoods to check them out? Which almost becomes something on each and every one of us. But I will look at the future of Charlotte, and I loved this in your poem about the future, because I look through our city through Parker, my daughter's eyes. In this school where she loves going to school and she loves her teacher, she loves all her friends. And when your kids come home and they talk about kids in their class and you can't remember what kid is who and the name and all that, and so I'll say, now which one's Sanvi, and which one's Olivia, and which one's Alexa? And when she's describing the kids in her class, and I will say, again, in her school, it's not a school, it's a majority of white children. She never mentions their skin color to describe them. And I noticed that in kindergarten, and in 3rd grade, it remains true. So I hope she doesn't lose that, because I think at some age, all of us were that way. But I have a lot of hope for that dream of Charlotte and beauty, and that it's already here. It's there through our kids' eyes. At least I see it in my own household. And I think that is beautiful, and I hope to continue to cultivate that. So for the personal dream, I hope that continues to be the same way.
I think my dream is similar to that, but maybe even more personal. I'm a shy person, even though I'm sitting up here and talking loudly with this one. Thanks, sound system people. Thank you, guys. And I've learned how to come out of this introvert thing. I love being an introvert. I'm never going to change. But I was raised by parents from the Midwest. Those of you who are Midwest, you probably know this. And my parents said, now, don't intrude. It's not exactly fear. It's fear of being in the wrong place and fear of causing harm in a situation inadvertently because I'm in the wrong place. And that has me in knots a lot. And what Charlotte has helped me do is not be a prisoner of my zip code, to help me find ways to be like your daughter. That's who I want to be when I grow up.
Me too.
And I hope that I can continue to move through that thing where increasingly I feel comfortable in the Indian festival and the Indian restaurant and the Indian grocery store and all of those things, because for me it's a hard process. And I am very grateful to the beauty of Charlotte that it has given me all of those opportunities and continues to give me opportunities to be that person.
Introverts of the world unite. Yes.
Oh, I can't really say I'm an introvert. And I don't want this to sound like a campaign speech running for mayor again or Senate. But what do I dream for Charlotte? That we could educate every young child in this community such that they become citizens of a 21st century economy, self-sufficient and able to carry their own weight. And I want them to live a life that minimizes fear, particularly fear of people who are different or live in a different zip code or whatever. I have two of my offsprings here tonight, my daughter, Erica, and my grandson, Alec, both of whom were trained and educated in the public schools of this community. And I'm very, very pleased with where they've gone since that, and even more pleased at the prospect that their children, or in this case, Alec's children, will be able to send their kids to a school in this community and see the same results which they've been fortunate to have, to continue to move forward. So good public schools, people earning a livable wage. When you are low income and you can't make ends meet, the amount of fear, that thing I keep talking about, builds, and it causes all kinds of, in my opinion, unnatural, ungodly behavior. So we need to overcome that in so many different kinds of ways. So I'd like to see a minimum wage that pays a livable wage. You know, that's important. Well-trained folks. And maybe more people who express their faith in lots of different ways and come and hear you give a sermon every now and then. Inspiring. That's it.
Tom, when you used the phrase prisoners of your zip code, many children in Charlotte are prisoners of their zip code. You know, if we want to predict future outcomes, just child zip code. And we can do better than that. We dream of doing better than that. We have stuff in place to do better than that. I think we have, I've talked to business people and they say, we have a business community here that's really committed to the good of Charlotte. I think that's correct. We have friendships across institutions. People want Charlotte to be a beautiful place. They want it to be good for everyone. We don't always know how to do it, right? We don't always know how to stay organized, but you know, I believe that the will is there, and that's a beautiful thing. Let me close by saying, just for me selfishly, this has been one of the most fun things I've ever done. And if you know of anything that's beautiful about Charlotte, or if you have don't send me a sunset photo. I asked one day by text message, send me something beautiful, and I got 47 sunsets. And they're all beautiful, of course, which is fine. If you know of something that's beautiful in Charlotte, something beautiful that's going on, you know, shoot me a note. We're going to keep this thing going for a while and try to get more and more people, try to start a movement and see if it's something that a lot of people could pay attention to. So send that to me. I'm easy to find. I'm James at MPUMC, like this church, Marspark United Methodist Church.org. We have a Facebook page and so on. We have groups that are forming this month. People are going to get together and talk about what's beautiful in their lives, what's beautiful in their home. I think that's a great way to connect and get to know people. So that'll be a great thing. So let me, I want to thank you for coming, but mostly I want you to join me in thanking these three panelists and Hannah for being with us. bless you.